Officer Hulsey was killed on February 19, 2007. A single shot entered the right side of his face and exited the left side of his face. The question in this case, and really the only question in this case, is who fired that shot? Evidence will show that there were 14 shots fired during this incident. One shot was fired from the gun of my client. 13 shots were fired from the gun of Officer Goyde. If the evidence suggests or shows that one of those shots from Officer Goyde shot and killed Officer Hulsey, then Bryan Hulsey is not guilty of murder. There's no argument that police work is dangerous work. There's no argument that this is an emotional case. That this case cannot and will not be decided upon emotion.
Objection argument.
Sustained.
This case must be decided upon the facts. The cold hard, objective, scientific, physical facts. Those scientific and objective facts will lead to the inevitable conclusion that Officer Hulsey was killed.
Objection argument.
Overruled.
By friendly fire. By a shot fired by one of his fellow officers. In making the statement that Officer Hulsey was killed by friendly fire, I am simply telling you what the objective, untainted by emotion, physical, scientific evidence will show you. No one wants to think that an officer could be unintentionally killed by a
Objection
bullet.
argument. No one wants to think.
Really?
Hold on. Overruled. Mr. Martinez, until he uses his what he's showing on the easel, please go ahead and have a seat. When he utilizes it, then you can come around. Please stay off the jury box when you do. The objection's overruled. Go ahead.
Right now, less distracting. In making the statement that Officer Hulsey was killed by friendly fire, I know that I am making a possibly controversial statement.
Objection argument. It's not evidence.
Overruled.
No one wants to think that this situation could happen, but it does. And it's not surprising that when it happens, somebody other than the government or the police, they try to blame it on somebody other than the government or the police. You see, the evidence will show that on February 19, 2007, Officer Goyde saw a car during the course of his normal morning patrol. When he noticed the car, a Kia, he noticed that the car had no license plate. He noticed that the car had possibly a cracked windshield. So he started to follow the car. He got behind the car, and at the time he got behind the car, he didn't turn on his lights. He followed the car as it made one turn and then made another turn. And eventually, the car came to a stop. Now, turn over.
Mr. Martinez, if you want to watch, you can.
I do.
The car came to a stop on North 60th Avenue on the side of the street. After pulling up behind the car and getting out, Officer Goyde noticed at some point that the car had an altered tag. He didn't notice it at first when he pulled the car over, but he eventually noticed it. After pulling up behind the Kia, Officer Goyde called for backup. He then went up to the car, to the driver's side of the car, and asked the driver for her license and her registration, and asked for the identification of the passengers in the car. He went back to his car and he used his police computer to find out that the driver had a warrant for her arrest, that the rear passenger had a warrant for her arrest. Officer Hulsey shows up. He gets out of his car. He is watching the passengers as Officer Goitia goes up and pulls the driver out of her car to arrest her pursuant to the warrants. Handcuffs her. He tells her she's under arrest, and he takes her back to his car. When he takes her back to his car, he places her in his car, and he has a conversation with her. Officer Hawley, in the meantime, is standing by the passenger side of the car, conversing with the passengers. After Officer Goitia gets done putting the driver in the back of his car, he then comes back and approaches the passenger side of the car. As he comes up to the passenger side of the car, neither officer has their gun drawn. They chat with the passengers for a minute. They asked Bryan if he had any weapons or guns on it, any weapons or drugs on it. He said no. They then asked him to get out of the car. At this point, Officer Goitia will tell us that everything was calm. Everybody was calm. Bryan goes to get out, but before he goes to get out, there's a few bags at his feet. And he starts to bring those bags out with him. And the officers say, no, leave the bags with you, but you can bring your purse. Now they're making a little fun of him. They tell him he can bring his purse.
Objection argument.
The state called it a man purse.
Overruled.
They tell him he can bring his purse with him. So he goes to get out of the car. And as he gets out of the car, Patsy Jones will tell us that his shirt came out, revealing a gun in his waistband. Officer Goitia saw the gun and immediately turned tail and ran. Didn't say anything to his fellow officer, but he ran. He was completely and utterly in a state of panic. He thought that at any moment he was going to be shot. He says, I thought I was going to die. And he hears imaginary bullets whizzing past his head. And why does he react this way? By the end of the trial, you will understand that Officer Goitia was involved in an event that was so terrifying to him that it caused him to react later in the future when this situation happened. He was so terrorized that the terror indelibly affected everything that he did here on 60th Avenue in Glendale. As Officer Goitia has admitted, he was never going to be 100% after that prior terror. The terror was fresh in his mind as he pulled these people over this day. Now, throughout the case, we will talk about how the past affects people's actions. Suffice it to say now that because of the terror of the past and Officer Goitia's own admission, he was not 100% that day, but he was back out on patrol. When he caught sight of Bryan's gun, he immediately thought he was going to be shot. He completely and utterly panicked. He turned and he ran from the side of the car, behind the Kia, in front of the two police cars, and down the side of the police car. He then, in his state of panic, turned and started to fire. He fired off 10 shots in less than 6 seconds. He then turns and runs 15, 25 steps and fires off 3 more shots. We're going to hear those shots right now. Those are, and that was start to play back on the loop. Those 14 shots you just heard are all the shots fired in this case. Glendale contracts with a company called ShotSpotter. ShotSpotter is a shot detection system which places microphones on the tops of houses and buildings throughout Glendale for one purpose: to listen for gunshots. ShotSpotter microphones pick up the gunshots and then translate them across the telephone wires to computers, which then use a complex mathematical formula to triangulate the position of the shots. The shots you just heard were from microphone number 2, which is sitting right about here, about a block and a half away. In plain English, ShotSpotter uses microphones to pinpoint, first of all, to let us hear the shots, and second of all, to pinpoint the location of the shots. We can listen to them, we can count them, we can pretty much see them. ShotSpotter tells us there were 14 shots fired. At the scene, the investigating officers found 13 pieces of brass fired from Officer Goidia's gun. Down here and up here. That leaves one shot fired from Bryan's gun. The police confirm ShotSpotter's findings because they find 13 pieces of brass, and they find one slug from the gun that Bryan had down under a tree in the opposite direction from which Bryan was running when he was being shot at by Officer Goidia. This one slug hit the house here and apparently bounced underneath the tree. From microphone number 11, which is positioned further west, we'll even be able to hear the ricochet of that bullet off the house. That shot was shot number 11. And Officer Goidia confirms for us that Bryan fired a shot in his general direction at shot number 11. And that's what made him think, I'm standing out here, I need to run for cover. Bryan's laying on the ground down here. Now, the objective scientific evidence will show that the lone shot fired by Bryan was fired while he had turned the corner and run down this direction, down the street, and then fired down into this direction as he lay on the ground, having already been shot by Officer Goidia. This is important for two reasons. First, it shows that Bryan Hulsey did not fire upon the officers when he first got out of the car. Second, it's important because the farther Bryan ran before he got shot, before he lay on the ground and turned and fired off a shot, the farther away he got from Officer Hawley, the more impossible it became for the single shot fired by Bryan's gun to have gone in the right side and out the left side of Officer Hawley. In fact, you will see that the only way that shot could have gone in the right side and out the left side was if Officer Hawley had his back turned to the situation. At all times pertinent to this crime, Officer Goidia was to the right of Officer Hawley. He was the only person to the right of Officer Hawley. How do we know where Bryan ran? Because the objective evidence The hail of bullets that followed Bryan from Officer Goydia's gun can be seen in marks on the ground and on the house. Officer Goydia's pattern in the lawn, on the house, and elsewhere will show a continuous, you're looking this way, left to right pattern of bullets. I told you that Officer Goydia was in a complete panic, and that's shown by the wild pattern of his shots. As he's shooting, 2 of his shots hit this car. 1 of his shots hits this house. 2 of his shots hit trailers down here, 3 to 4 blocks away. He says that he saw Bryan get shot and go down. Then he ran back up here, fired off 3 more shots, but Bryan's already on the ground. And again, when do we hear the 11th? When do we hear the shot from Bryan's gun? It's at the 11th shot. This is part of that scientific, objective evidence that will help you decide the merits of this case on the facts, not on the emotion, the terrible emotion of a young officer's death. What was Officer Hulsey doing when Officer Goydia was firing his 13 shots at Bryan? We don't know exactly. But the evidence will show you what he didn't do. What he didn't do was draw his gun. Officers are trained that when they see a gun, they draw their gun. Officer Hulsey never drew his gun. There are a couple of conclusions that you can reach from that. One, that he never saw Bryan draw his gun. 2, that he was shot from the right while he is watching Bryan run, and Officer Goydia off to his right shooting. He is unexpectedly hit by a shot in his right cheek, which exits his left cheek. The only person to his right is Officer Goydia. Officer Goydia tells us that from the time he started to run from this position, ran over here, fired off 10 shots, ran back up here, fired off 3 more shots. He never knew where Officer Hulsey was. He never saw him until he's done shooting and sees Officer Hulsey laying on the ground. And where is Officer Hulsey? Officer Hulsey is now on the driver's side of the Kia. The last time Officer Goydia saw him, he was on the passenger side of the Kia. The medical examiner will tell us that the shot that hit Officer Hulsey would have knocked him out and knocked him down. So we know objectively where Officer Hulsey was standing when he was shot. What else will the objective and scientific evidence show you? The medical examiner will tell you that the bullet that hit Officer Hulsey went in his right side, out his left side of his face. That the shots went in and out on an even plane. The conclusion is that Officer Hulsey was not ducking, not trying to get out of the way of a shot, but was hit unexpectedly as he stood watching Bryan run. Officer Goydia was at all times to the right of Officer Hulsey as he fired those 13 shots. Bryan was not. And what about ballistic evidence? Wouldn't ballistic evidence tell us which slug hit Officer Hall? Normally it would. But as I told you, the shot went in one side and out the other, and they never found the slug. At the autopsy of Officer Hawley, they took an x-ray of his head. And in the x-ray, they could see many small fragments of the bullet. Officer Bustos, who was in charge of the case, attended the autopsy. And he told the medical examiner, when the medical examiner asked, "What do you want me to do with these small fragments?" He said, "Leave them alone, don't take them out." And then the body of Officer Hawley was cremated. And we lost all of those fragments. Jocko Swanepoel, an expert, a ballistics expert, he was a former police officer from South Africa, now working as a ballistics forensic expert in California, will tell us that those small fragments of bullets could have told us which gun fired the shot. But they were destroyed. Now, interestingly, remember I told you that Bryan was shot in the leg. He went down. The shot that hit Bryan in the leg went through his leg. And they never recovered that slug either. But when they took him to the hospital, in his leg were a bunch of fragments from the bullet that hit him. The doctor operating on Bryan took the fragments out and then asked the officer who was attending the operation, because obviously somebody was accompanying Bryan, and said, "What do you want me to do with these?" And the officer said, "Just throw them out." Amazingly, there went our comparison fragments. Now we know that the gunshot that went through Bryan's leg came from Officer Goyde. So we would have had those fragments, those known fragments. But we have forever lost the fragments that were seen in the x-ray of Officer Hall. There's more scientific and objective evidence to come. The location of all the shots from Officer Goyde's gun will explain what all these markings on this map mean. The location of those casings, the more information from ShotSpotter, all of which will go to show how Officer Goyde reacted, panicked when he perceived he had been placed in danger. The objective evidence will tell you that where Officer Hawley was standing when he was shot. Officer Goyde will tell you that he never saw Officer Hawley until all of the shooting stopped, which in and of itself tells us something. We respectively submit that the objective and scientific evidence, the cold hard facts upon which you must decide this case, will show that the state's theory is just plain wrong. Officer Hawley, where was Officer Hawley standing when he was struck? An objective piece of evidence. Where was Officer Goyde at the precise moment Officer Hawley was shot? Where was Bryan? Where's the slug that went through Officer Hawley? Where are those tiny fragments? Where's the bullet slug that went through Bryan's leg? Where are those fragments? We ask that you listen carefully to the evidence in this case. Keeping in mind, as the judge has instructed you, that police officers are human beings. Their testimony is not to be judged more credibly.
Objection argument.
Sustained.
I'm simply repeating the jury instruction.
That's not the point of the trial that you're supposed to do. That's sustained.
This is an emotional case. It's a tragedy. But it's not a murder. Bryan Hulsey cannot be convicted of murder from the friendly fire of a fellow police officer. He cannot be convicted of murder because of that accident. We ask that you listen closely to the evidence and at the end of this trial, find him not guilty.
Thank you, Mr. Reeves. Ladies and gentlemen, frequently after opening statements in a case, there are some issues that I need to go over with the lawyers so that we can make sure we've got our witnesses lined up and the presentation ready for you, and this case is no different. And so we're going to actually start the testimony, actual testimony tomorrow, so you get an early day today. We expect to have a full day for you tomorrow. We're going to be back starting at 10:30 tomorrow morning with witness testimony. I want to talk to you a little bit more about the admonition before I send you away. The jury instructions I read to you told you there may or may not be media coverage of this trial. I think there will be media coverage of this trial. It's extremely important that you not allow yourself to be exposed to that media coverage. I'd ask that you not watch the news tonight in case there is coverage, because if you're watching it, you might see something. So I'd ask you to do that. You are directed not to allow yourself to be exposed to any media coverage. It's more than just media coverage, however, that you need to be aware of in today's world. People post on the internet in all kinds of ways things about current events. I don't know what's out there, what's going to be out there. I would ask you to be very careful not to get on social media sites like Facebook and give yourself a chance to see anything. I don't know, again, what's going to be out there, but be very careful getting on the internet or otherwise putting yourself in a position where somebody may say something about the case. As I told you earlier, it's extremely important for all of us that all the information you hear about this case comes in this courtroom and doesn't come from anywhere else. There are people in this world that put things out there on the internet that may not be true. And even if they are true, they may not be appropriate for you to hear as jurors in this case. If you are exposed to anything, please let me know and we'll talk about it. It doesn't mean that you will automatically not be a juror, but I need to know about it and be able to assess it if that happens. Please don't hesitate to come to me if it does happen. Sometimes something like that can happen and we need to know. So please proactively come to me if you hear anything or are exposed to anything about the case. Has anybody had any issues so far that you think you might want to talk to me about? Anybody? If you raise your hand. Anybody? Okay, I don't see any hands. Please don't hesitate to come to me if that's the case. As I told you before, any cameras in the courtroom are not permitted to show any jurors. So you may see a camera in the courtroom. That camera cannot show any of you, and it won't. If they violate that, they won't be here. So understand that it will not be showing you at all. All right, so we're back tomorrow. We get here about 10:25 at the place where Kim showed you to assemble. Remember the admonition, and we'll see you for trial tomorrow. Have a good evening.